I have warm memories of a late summer evening, sometime in the late 70s, when Sir Richard Attenborough was in town shooting for Satyajit Ray's Shatranj Ke Khiladi. Sir Richard had had a grueling day in the studios shooting, and we could record our interview only after 11 in night. Sir Richard retained his sense of humor as we went on to talk about his experiences of working with Satyajit Ray and what he found so special about working with Satyajit Ray.
Cinema, I've never really felt is a totally true art form. I think theatre is. I don't think cinema is. I think it's a semi-art form. I think it's a craft. I think one of the reasons I feel that is that the delegation of the creation is so much. There is a director, yes, but he has a cameraman, and he has an art director, and he has actors, and he has writers, and he has composers, etc., and camera operators, etc., etc. I think the extraordinary thing about Manikda, as I've been allowed to call him since I've been here, is that he performs so many of those functions. He writes the screenplay, he composes the music, he directs it, he operates the camera, he half lights the set. Certainly he works with the lighting cameraman in such detail that any source of light or change that he wants, he gets. He edits his own films, almost as Chaplin did.
He's even so firm about what he wants from the actor.
I'm afraid he is.
Very clear.
Absolutely. And his interest and almost what's the phrase I want? Obsession with detail means that he puts 90% of what there is onto that screen.
Soon after, we were shooting a longer interview with Satyajit Ray on 25 years of rich filmmaking. This was the first time he agreed to give a long interview to the Doordarshan in India. And as usual, as with all his work in cinema, he was so concerned about it that the producer, Debas Chakraborty, and I spent long hours, about 3 long sessions with him, discussing the nitty-gritty of the program, every little detail, every little element that he and we wanted to bring into the interview.
Your involvement in every separate aspect of the making of a film has been a slow and gradual thing. When you started, you were not working on all the aspects of the cinema. Why and how did you decide to take on every element of the film one by one?
Well, actually, it's not every element really, but most of the elements, I think. In the early days, for instance, at the time of the trilogy and Opushantra, I was doing the screenplay. I was directing, of course, and I used to get visual ideas for sets and things like that. I did my own casting because I had very clear ideas of the kind of actors that I wanted for certain parts. I did my own casting, and then at the time of editing, I didn't operate the camera at that time, and I didn't write the music. At the time of editing also, I was there, very much there. The films were more or less, as the expression goes, cut in the camera, so there wasn't a great deal left for the editor to do, but of course I've had a very creative editor helping me. But later on, for instance, I took over operating.
Since when?
Since the time of Charulata. You see, I decided that the camera, it was through the camera that one was able to judge the action and the movement of the actors best, rather than sitting in a chair by the side. And I found it helped the actors also, because I was behind the camera, you know, they couldn't see me actually, and it helped them. They felt easier. And in the early days I worked with, on music, I worked with professional, I wouldn't say professional composers, but professional musicians. I mean, I worked with Ravi Shankar on 4 of my films. But they were essentially instrumentalists. They were performers, concert performers. They were not trained film composers, so that for instance, they were not trained to write music which would run for 2 minutes and 7 seconds and things like that, you see. So it was always a problem working, although they were very inventive. Ravi Shankar in particular devised some beautiful music for the trilogy, and I was very happy to use them. But the method that I used was that they would come, maybe just for a day or a couple of days. They would be, the rest of the time they were touring all over the world, if not all over India. And they would be available for, let us say, 2 days or 3 days, in which time they would probably have one look at the film, not even the whole film. For instance, Ravi Shankar saw only half of Pathe Panchali. And they would write certain specific pieces. And the rest of the time, I was interested more in using their instruments. I was interested in Ravi Shankar's sitar. I was interested in Ali Akbar Sarod, and interested in certain ragas which I knew would fit certain situations. So I had them perform maybe for 3 minutes, 4 minutes at a stretch, various ragas in various moods and various tempos. And later on, it meant a tremendous lot of work in the cutting room for me, trying to fit the music with the scenes. So finally, in around 1960, at the time of Teen Konna, I decided to do my own music.
Has the change or the variety of themes which I've adopted later been also a factor in this choice that you have to rely on your own music? In the earlier films, for example, you had more of a freedom, more of a going back into the romantic world of the village. And later on you have been concerned with other forms and other sorts of experiences.
Yes, that is true, because more and more I felt that I needed, for instance, when you are doing a theme which is concerned with urban, the contemporary urban society, you can't use conventional classical Indian music instruments like the sitar and so on. They just don't go with the theme. So I decided to use a combination of Western and Eastern instruments, and I had always been interested in Western music, and I was also familiar with the Western style of notation. So I decided, and since I was getting too many ideas of my own, it's not always very satisfactory to have to dictate great musicians like Vilayat Khan and Ali Akbar. And it threatened our friendship on a personal level, so I decided to do it on my own. And now more and more I use less and less music, I find, because I can use the mixing facilities have improved, and I can use a more creative soundtrack whereby one can use actual sounds almost as you use music to suggest moods and things like that.
Would you give some instances, or maybe one instance of what you call this creative use of sound in your recent works? Something that has
for instance, in a city story, you can use, in a Calcutta story in John Orano, actually the city itself provided the noise of traffic and that sort of thing, and it's provided the mood building soundtrack, you know.
সব পাড়া দেখছো সোমনাথ, রাস্তার দুই দিকে খাড়াই উঠে গেছে সব বাড়ি, এইখানেই লক্ষ্মীর বাস।
In Oshani Sanket, which one could well have used folk music in abundance, but I prefer to use bird noises, I prefer to use the sound of dhenki,
Right.
that sort of thing, and I prefer to use wind noises and other extraneous. I used one particular bird, the woodpecker, which I recorded. I was lucky to be able to record one. And it comes at a very crucial point when Moti dies. At that point, when she is lying on the ground with her eyes, staring eyes, and hold the camera for about 5, 6, 7 seconds on that face, we can hear the woodpecker going, which is a very shrill, rather alarming kind of, rather eerie sort of sound. And I felt that use of music would sentimentalize the scene, so I decided to use this, which was also a realistic sound, as well as a kind of a stylization of sound.
Also at a certain level. At one time, your films were associated with actors that you had discovered and molded for your films. But you have actually dealt with all sorts of actors, with old professionals, veterans, newcomers, artists that you have discovered, children, even animals in certain cases.
Well, actually, I started using professionals fairly early on, if you remember, because after Pathir Pachale and Aparijito came Porosh Pathor and
You had
Jalsaghar.
Tulsi Chakraborty.
So
and
I
Chobi
had
Vishwas.
used Tulsi Chakraborty and I had used Chobi Vishwas. Chobi Vishwas was a very, very special case because he was really a very, very big professional actor at that time, probably the biggest character actor on the Bengali screen of that period. And I had some problems in the early stages, like for instance in Jalsaghar, in the portions which show him as a young man, he insisted on doing his own makeup. A comparative newcomer, and being new to Chobi Vishwas, I couldn't do anything about it. So all that portion which shows him as a young man remains a very theatrical sort of makeup. That stays in the film as a blemish. But I got used to Chobi Babu and he got used to me in a very short time. And when I made the second film with him, Devi, he was so cooperative, and so one uses different methods with different actors. One with professionals who are competent. Another method with professionals who are not so competent, where you handle them almost as amateurs. That has happened too. And a third method with newcomers who are talented, and a fourth method with newcomers who are not talented, whom I cast for their face and voice, perhaps, just for these two qualities which fit a certain character. And yet a fifth and sixth methods, fifth with gifted children and the sixth method with not so gifted children. So I have used all kinds, and I still keep on using all these 6 methods for my actors.
There are directors who insist that they would not like to involve their actors in the making of the film in any way. They would give instructions, they would pass orders, and it is for the actors to work out the things.
Well,
do you follow any such rigid principle?
If an actor has a very, very large part, like for instance Oppo in the trilogy, or let us say Pratidwandi, the main actor, who is throughout the film, or with Chobi Babu in Jalsaghar, and in many of these films which are dominated by 1 or 2 or 3 characters, I usually they're naturally given the script well beforehand, so they have time to learn their lines. And in addition to that, if they show an interest in discussing the part with me, to find out the motivations, to be more clear about how it should be played, I'm perfectly willing to oblige them, and I do that. I have had sessions with various actors.
He gives me the script, and after I read the script, we sit together, discuss a lot of details, how to play this particular scene, or what should be the makeup, how I should use my voice in this particular film. And this course of discussion continues for a long time. And when he goes to the floor, he again makes some corrections or further additions and alterations in his script for the final shooting script. And when in the set he reads out the dialogues again, and there exactly I know how to play that particular scene, because through his intonations, through his rendering of the dialogues, it becomes absolutely clear how he wants me to do it.
একবার বলো তো,
আমরা ডক্টর গুপ্তের কথা শুনতে এসেছি, জনবার্তা সম্পাদকের কথা নয়।
আমরা ডক্টর গুপ্তের কথা শুনতে এসেছি, জনবার্তা সম্পাদকের কথা নয়।
আমরা ডক্টর গুপ্তের কথা শুনতে এসেছি, জনবার্তা সম্পাদকের কথা নয়।
আমার দিকে তাকিয়ে একবার ডিরেক্টলি, কোনো দিকে অন্য দিকে।
When you work on your scripts, do you have similar dialogues with the authors when they are available? I don't mean the dead authors on whom you work, but
well,
authors.
If it has happened in not many cases, because I started with dead authors, and the first living author that that was Parashuram Parashpatra, and when I had prepared a treatment, I went and saw him and told him what kind of little sort of inventions of my own that I was going to put into the film, and he was terribly excited and very, very happy. And with Tarashankar it was a different experience, because I told Tarashankar Babu that I would like to make a film of Jalsaghar. He said, "All right, I'll do the screenplay for you." And I said, "Well, certainly. I would love you. It would be wonderful if you could do the treatment." Then he started doing a treatment. And when he had finished about 3 chapters, I found that he was writing an original story, completely original story, which had almost nothing to do with the short story. So I said, "No, Tarashankar Babu, I'm interested in your short story, so let me do a treatment." So that was that. But I never had a chance to discuss with him after the film opened what he thought of the film. But then I've discussed the films with projects with Narendranath Mitra, for instance. He entirely approved of Mahanagar. And by and large, Shankar has approved of his treatments. But I think an actor really would ideally prefer a literal translations of their stories. And I can sense that there is a certain element of dissatisfaction even in their approval. I've noticed that. But this doesn't apply to all the writers that I'm thinking of. For instance, Shunil didn't like his version of, my version of Aranyadin Ratri, but he wholeheartedly approved of all the changes that I made in the next film that I did, Pratidandi. And, well, this has been more or less the case.
Has your attitude towards the actual original works been the same when you have been working with Rabindranath's script, or with Bibhuti Bhushan Banerjee's script, or with the more contemporary authors?
Well, it's not that one makes changes because just for the fun of it. I mean, it's one usually has a much more serious reason for it. And I personally can't think of a single instance of even a classic which has been translated successfully into cinema as being totally unchanged from its original form, because a writer, an author, doesn't write with the film medium in mind at all, and I think certain changes are inevitable. I had to make certain rather significant changes. For instance, at the end of Postmaster, the girl, little Ratan, falls at the feet of the postmaster and sort of beseeches with him not to go away, or at least take her with him. But I felt that it was a bit Victorian. It might sort of spill over on the screen. It might seem over emotional or sentimental. So I had her suffer. I had her go through these pangs of, through the same emotion of suffering, without actually having her fall at his feet. You know, those changes one has to make.
Environments have played a very large and significant part in your films, and in certain cases you have made the environments yourself. In other cases you have found out environments, chosen environments, and worked there. But all through you have paid a very great attention to the fact of the environment, the reality, the impact of the environment. How have you actually tried to build your environments? Gone out of your, starting from a story, starting from a theme, and making a choice of your environment. You have not been controlled or limited, I have noticed, within any rigid law that you would work only in exteriors or only in the studio.
No, for instance, when there are certain things that are dictated by circumstances. For instance, when one makes a film about contemporary Calcutta, one should ideally shoot on location in actual interiors. And this is something which happens abroad all the time, because nowadays, for instance, the new wave people, all the French directors, they have practically stopped building sets. They all work on location in actual interiors, apartment interiors, out in the streets. But the environment there is different. Here, shooting on location in a city, urban location, can be hell, absolutely. I have had this experience many, many times. But streets, we cannot build in the studio. So we have willy-nilly to shoot in the streets, no matter how many thousands of people gather to watch and get in the way of your work. But interiors, I find, because in order to avoid the problem, the problem of dubbing, of post-synchronizing the dialogue, which I always find is a very mechanical process, I prefer to build interiors in the studio, because I think I have sufficiently imaginative and clever art directors who will be able to simulate reality. And I have a sufficiently intelligent and mature cameraman to simulate actual lighting, available lighting. And our studio interiors have fooled many of the best foreign critics. I have spoken to them. They can hardly ever make out which is actual set or which is actual interior. So this has been the case, and this is, as I told you, this is dictated by circumstances. But if a film is laid entirely on location, like for instance Kanchenjunga, which was planned to be shot in Darjeeling, and entirely outdoors, taking into account the changes of weather that takes place in Darjeeling, and the whole story, I spent a fortnight or so there and observed how the weather keeps changing there. And the whole story was planned to take into account of rising mists disappearing, and the sun coming out, the clouds covering the sun, and the gradual falling of light from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, which is the running time of the film.
And so even the changes of moods and the changes of tone were related.
The changes of mood, this was a very special type of film where the changes of mood were dictated by the changes of actual atmospheric conditions.
Good day, sir.
I think of myself primarily as a storyteller, as a maker of fiction films. But I have, on the occasions when I made documentaries, they were on subjects which fascinated me, which really drew me, which inspired me, let us say. First, there was a film on Rabindranath for the centenary, and the film on Binod Bihari Mukherjee, who was my art teacher in Shantiniketan, a remarkable man as well as a remarkable painter, and a film on Bala Saraswati, which was a tribute to a great dancer. But I would like to make more short story films, there's no question of that, because we do have a very rich fund of filmable short stories which should not be expanded.
You have worked on a wide variety of themes, styles, genres. You have done children's films, fantasy films, realistic films, films based in the 19th century or even an 18th century situation, films right in the 70s, the entire range. Do you still think you have other themes, other genres that haunt you or excite you occasionally, things that you would like to do in the future?
Yes, there are a few things which haven't been done yet. For instance, I've always wanted to do an epic. I had been fascinated by the Mahabharata, and I'm still fascinated by Mahabharata, but I don't think the whole of Mahabharata can be tackled. So perhaps a segment of an epic, a segment of Mahabharata I'd do using our tradition of stylization, perhaps using the Kathakali. I really haven't got a very clear notion of what I want to do, but I definitely do want to do an epic, a story which everybody knows from beforehand. That is something which I want to do.
What are the segments that have...
Well, I think one can make a film on the dice game itself. Just the dice game can make an entire film. The main problem with Mahabharata is the characters. I mean, if one thinks of an Indian audience, then there's no problem, because everybody knows who Karna is and who Bhishma is, etc. But I'm afraid a film of this nature has to be planned for the world market. And there, the relationship of the characters will create tremendous problems. Tremendous problem, because unless you address a person as uncle, for instance, at least 3 times, he's not uncle. I mean, this is one of the things that one learns over the years. That, and perhaps I would like to do a folk tale at some point. Very much I'd like to do an authentic folk tale, not Gopi Gain, but an authentic folk tale, perhaps based on a Mohan Shingitika ballad, in a very, very simple style with very, very little dialogue, but using again Bengali folk forms. I'll continue to make children's films from time to time, that I know. I have decided to do that. And perhaps an English language film involving Indians. Because, you see, if you have people of different provinces getting together in a situation, English is the only lingo that they can use. And that kind of English language film, where the language itself would be used creatively, maybe one person will be very difficult, we're very sort of unvocal because of his lack of command of the language. Another would be very fluent, another would use a certain strong Indian accent. That sort of a situation. It's still very much at the back of my mind, but I don't know what. So there are still a few.
You had a plan to do a science fiction film.
Yes, indeed. I was forgetting about that. That I would very much like to do, but again, that is a question of resources, technical resources. Because now Kubrick's 2001 and a few other films made since then have set such a high standard.
And have extended the horizons of science fiction to infinity.
There's no question of making that kind of a science fiction film here in Bengal. But the idea that I had originally was more of a metaphysical sort of science fiction film, not involving so much technical expertise and perfection. Perhaps that is one thing I would love to do at some point.
Some years passed by. There were dreams, there were hopes, there were plans at the end of that last interview. And in 1981, he had already completed his first film for the TV in India, his version of Premchand's Satgati. Already in our last interview, he had suggested that short stories were a special area where he found he could experiment. Recognize the short stories, the shortness of the short stories, and play about with it. That gives you greater scope to experiment. And he had discovered Premchand with Shatranj already. He was moving also into an area which he had not tackled earlier. But this was an area which was fascinating him more and more, as he explained in the short interview that preceded the first telecast of Satgati.
A little more than a year back, Manikta, you told me that you seem to have exhausted the problems on which you would have liked to make films, and you were not even finding stories which posed new problems, more vital problems. How did you hit upon Satgati?
Well, actually, Doordarshan had asked me to do first a series of short stories. Then, of course, we decided that we can start with one. And so I started looking for a short story in Hindi, because since this was to be for All India screening, therefore I decided on looking for a Hindi story. And naturally I started reading Premchand. I knew quite a number of Premchand stories. I had read them in translations before. But this time I found a fairly large volume of short stories published by, I think it was part of the UNESCO translation scheme. And I got that book, I read the stories, and I found Satgati, Deliverance, which is called Deliverance in English, in that book. And it struck me as a remarkably fine story and very, very filmic story, and dealing with a problem which, of course, I found fascinating.
Did your choice, Manikta, have to do more with the quality of the story, the cinematic richness of the story, or with the reality, the things happening around us in India at the same time?
Yes, but both. I mean, one looks not just for a form or an effective structure, but also for a theme. I think and this is a story which combined both extremely effectively. When I say that it's a perfect story, of course I mean primarily that it's perfect for filming. I mean, it's very cinematic. But at the same time, I felt that it was dealing with a problem which concerned me, which I found that I was very, very interested in, and it was treated extremely effectively. And it also had to do with what was happening now, although it was a story which was written something like 50 years ago, or 50 or 60 years ago, but it still is contemporary.
Did you have to make any change in your basic style or approach when making a film for the TV, especially you're making a film for the TV in India for the first time?
Not really, in the sense of, I mean, one has to think of the slot. For instance, I was told that the story had better be around 50 minutes long. And so I had to keep that in mind. There was no question of treating it in a very free fashion. I had to keep the length in mind all the time. And it just so happens that the story falls within that slot very easily. And even the first cut turned out to be about 50 minutes long. So I was lucky from that point of view, because it's a story that lends itself to that kind of treatment.
Did you have to make any changes in the story as such?
Well, I would say that I made very, very little changes. I wrote in a scene, it was hinted at in the original scene between the Brahmin and a couple of chaps, also Brahmin, who come to him for advice. I think Premchand merely mentions that the Brahmin was having a conversation with some people in the veranda, but I wanted a scene with dialogue, and that was entirely written for the treatment, for the film. Otherwise, the story follows the original, the film follows the original very, very closely, remarkably closely. And when people talk of the effectiveness of the last scene where the Brahmin sprinkles holy water, etc., etc., that is precisely described in exactly the same way in the original. And the dragging of the dead body and the death of Dukhi, everything is there in the original. I have not really dealt with the rural theme properly yet. I mean, Sadgati marks a beginning, perhaps, of that level of society, and I would definitely like to do more.
Satyajit Ray has been awarded the Special Oscar, which he considers as a great recognition of his lifetime's work in cinema.
Well, it has been an extraordinarily pleasant surprise, and I never expected to get it for one reason, because not many of my films have been shown in the States. Out of the 26 or 27 I've made, I think about a dozen have been shown. But in spite of that, they are giving me this award, which is a great honor for me, and I don't think there's anything more that a filmmaker covets than this particular award, which is the highest award that a filmmaker can get. I'm very happy.